In this lesson, we're going to learn how to factor using the distributive property, and then we're also going to try and solve equations by factoring. Okay, so we're going to use what we learned in the last lesson about greatest common factor. Okay, so here in the first one, I have 25a squared plus 15a. Okay, so I first want to think of, okay, well, what's the greatest common factor of 25a and 15a? Okay, so think about what we did in the last lesson. Well, I see that the greatest common factor, here 5, well, the only thing they have in common is the 5. So they have a 5 in common, that's the greatest common factor, and they also both have an a. So the greatest common factor here is 5a. Okay, so now what I'm going to do in my original equation is I'm going to take out 5a. Okay, so 5a times something has to equal 25a squared. Okay, so 5a times 5a, and then 5a times something has to equal 15a. So 5a times 3 would give me 15a. So now we can just double check. 5a times 5a, yep, that's 25a squared, plus 5a times 3 is 15a, okay? So we're kind of going backwards, okay? We're like taking out the factors. Okay, let's look at the next one. So we have 18x squared minus 12x to the third. Okay, so we want to find the greatest common factor here. So let's look at the numbers that could be in common. So they both have 2. They both have a 3. What about 4? Oh, and they both have a 6, because 6 times 2 is 12, and 6 times 3 is 18. Okay, so the greatest common factor would be 6, and then they both have an x squared. Okay, so this is my greatest common factor from each of these two terms. So now I'm going to take out this 6x squared, and then whatever's left over goes inside. Okay, so 6x squared times what number is going to get me 18x squared? 6x squared times 3 will give me 18x squared. And then 6x squared minus 2x will give me 12x to the third. Okay, so here I've just factored. Okay, you can always go ahead and double check, see if it actually works. Okay, so another method that we can use for factoring is to use grouping. Okay, you only use grouping when you have 4 terms. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the first step is group together the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite 4ab plus 3a. Okay, and then here I have 8b plus 6. Okay, so in the first one here, I want to think about what's the greatest common factor I can take out from both of them. Okay, well, I see that they both have an a, and that's really it. Okay, so a, what would be left here would be 4b, because I can check. A times 4b, yes, would give me 4ab, plus 3, because this a will distribute. In the second one, I see that they both have a 2. So I can take out 2. So I would have 4b left, because 2 times 4b is 8b. And then plus 3. 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. Okay? So this is what we want to happen. We want there to be the same left over in the parentheses. Okay? So now this outside here, a and 2, become its own. A plus 2. Okay, and then the one that repeats gets multiplied, 4b plus 3. Okay, so here is your answer. Okay, we've just factored this polynomial up here. Okay, so it's like the opposite of what we were doing about polynomials. Okay, so here we have, I'm just going to write this in, answer. Then if we want to check to make sure it's correct, we can check using FOIL. So let's check. A times 4b, 4ab, A times 3, 3A. 2 times 4AB is 8B. And then plus 6. Okay, so let's check to see if that's the original problem. And yeah, it is the original problem. So when you check it, you know that your answer is correct. Okay, so I'd like you to pause the video for a moment and try this grouping on your own. Okay, so just to remind you that grouping is used for 4 terms. So I'm going to group together the first 2 and the second 2. So I have 4ax plus 3ay. And then the second one I have 4bx plus 3by. Okay, so now I'm going to take out the greatest common factor from each. Okay, so here they both have an a, and that's really it. So 4x would be left over to make it 4ax plus a times 3y would give me this up here, 3ay. Okay, and the next one, I see that they both only have in common a b. Okay, so then here I can take out 4x and 3y would be left over. Okay, again, you can distribute to double check. All right, so now, so far we're looking good because I have the same left over. So the first term is going to be a plus b, the outside, a and b. And the second term is the one that is repeated. 4x plus 3y. Okay, and that's it. So now you have it in factored form. Okay, so solving equations in factored form. Okay, so the first step is we want it to be equal to 0, and we see that here it already is equal to 0. So now I'm going to break apart each term. I have d minus 5, which is equal to 0. And then I also have 3d plus 4, which is equal to 0. Okay, so I'm just breaking apart each part and setting it equal to 0. Okay, so in this case, if I solve for d, d is going to be equal to 5. Okay, so that's one answer. Here, if I solve for d, and then divide by 3, here d is equal to negative 4/3. Okay, so I have 2 answers. D is negative 5, and it's negative 4/3. Okay, so the reason that we're doing this is because we know that if one of them is equal to 0, then the other one must also be equal to 0 because they're multiplied together. Whenever we multiply, it's equal to 0. Okay, so pause the video for a moment and try this one. Okay, so what you should have done is set each parenthesis equal to 0. Okay, and now I can solve. So I'm going to add 3. So 2b is equal to 3. Divide by 2. So b can be 3 over 2, okay, which is also 1.5. Or it can be, and I'm going to add 8. 3b equals 8. So here b is 8/3. Okay, or you can also rewrite this as 2 2/3. Okay, so you're always going to have 2 answers. Okay, so here we need to solve this equation, but it's not equal to 0 yet. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite this one. Okay, this is what it should look like. X squared equals 7x. So I want it to be equal to 0. So I can subtract 7x and bring it over here. Now I'm going to have x squared minus 7x, which is equal to 0. Okay? So first step, set equal to 0. Secondly, I need to factor out what's in common. Okay? So factor GCF comes next. They both have an x. So what's left over would be x minus 7. Okay, again, double check. X times x, yep, x squared. And this would give us minus 7x. Okay? So now I'm going to set each of them equal to 0. Here I just have x, so x is equal to 0. And here I have x minus 7 is equal to 0. Okay, so I already have one answer. The other one is going to be x is equal to 7. So x is 7 and 0. Okay, I'd like you guys to go ahead and try this one here. 6x squared equals negative 4x. Okay, so what you should have done first was set it equal to 0. So I add 4 to both sides. Sorry, 4x. And I get 6x squared plus 4x is equal to 0. Okay, next factor the GCF. Okay, so they both have in common, I can take out a 2 because they both are multiplied by 2, and also x. Okay, so 2x times 3x would give me back to 6x squared, and 2x plus 2 would give me 4x. Okay, so my first equation, 2x equals 0, and my second equation, 3x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so I'm going to solve for x in both of these. Okay, in the first one, x is 0. And in the second one, x is going to be equal to negative 2 thirds. Okay, so 2 answers here. Okay, so in this lesson we kind of learned how to apply the greatest common factor to factor out. Okay, we talked about grouping where you need 4 terms in order to group, and then also how to solve an equation.